But I'm going to start again. The meeting of the ARPA Day Transformational Committee are public meetings as defined by the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act and should follow these guidelines. As the public meeting is held virtually, it will be recorded and made available to view on the DDS website. Committee members must make a good faith effort to state their name and title if applicable each time they speak during the meeting. If a committee member would like to speak, please raise your hand and one of the co-chairs will acknowledge you. There is no public comment portion to this meeting. Members of the public are able to join, watch, and listen only. All right. Were there any questions about the minutes from the 10/11/22 meeting? Would someone make a motion to approve?
So moved. Beth Fisher-Kuhn.
A second?
Jennifer Keatley, UCP, Eastern Connecticut.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the next one is the consultant update for the communication. I'm very happy to let everybody know we hired a communication consultant. It is the McDowell Communication Group. Scope of service down with them, and hopefully we'll be presenting them to the committee as we move forward. Am I still freezing? People have this.
You froze briefly when you were announcing the McDowell Group, so I don't know if there's anything to say about them other than you have hired them.
We have hired them. We've had one meeting with them. And we're meeting again with them on Thursday to work on the scope of service that they will provide to us. All right, next.
Yes. Sorry, this is Jennifer from UCP. What will their scope be? What will their scope of work be?
Basically getting the message out. They'll be working with both engagement groups a real lot with them and working with families and just getting the message out about transformation and working with Deloitte on that process also. Probably the next meeting, once the scope of the work is done with them, I'll be able to explain more of exactly what they're going to do.
Okay.
Varian Salter, self-advocate coordinator at DDS in the North Region. Did you say that you would introduce them at one of our meetings, or?
I hope to get them on board at one of our meetings, but we are working on a scope of service with them. So exactly what they will providing to the state will be explained at the next meeting. We're still in the process of working on that with them. Any other questions? All right, next we have Jennifer. She's going to give us a presentation on the project search.
Great.
Thank you, Jennifer, and you're on.
All righty. Can you see my screen? Am I sharing? No? Okay, hang on one second. Sorry. How about now? Can you all see my screen? No? Still no. I just practiced this yesterday.
It worked so well. I
know, just a minute ago. Let me just see here. Hang on. Share. Still no? Huh. Hang on one second. How about now?
There we go.
All right. All right. So Keith asked me to present on Project Search. For the providers in the room, you probably already know this. I'm going to make this kind of quick for you, but for families and of individuals that participate in day programs or other settings, this is just kind of an overview of Project Search, which is an option under this transformation to move to a service like this. So I can only speak to what our Project Search is like. Each Project Search is a little bit different. So I'll just kind of talk briefly about what ours is. So basically, Project Search is a coordinated effort between a private provider such as UCP, a business, and Project Search, and DDS. So in 2019, DDS put out a pilot project and asked for agencies that were interested in doing this, and we found Mohegan Sun as a business partner to do the Project Search program. So what is Project Search? It is a national organization. It is a business-led employment preparation program. It takes place entirely inside the host business site to give an individual workplace immersion. While in the workplace, they also get classroom instruction, career exploration, hands-on training, and they do this through worksite rotations. And then at the end, it culminates in individualized job development. So basically, it started at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and I think if you look into Project Search, you'll see that many Project Search sites take place in hospital settings. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of kind of entry-level work, so there's a lot of rotations and opportunities for individuals to learn different skill sets. So what Project Search is actually an internship. It was kind of based on schools, a school district, and some of the Project Search sites have a combination of people from DDS, from school districts, from BRS, anybody who's interested in doing an internship. And the internship is 3 10-week segments. In that they go to 3 different job sites or rotations within the host business. Ours runs 5 days a week. We use the Project Search curriculum, and we have a team approach. So we meet with the host business to introduce our folks to them, our interns, and then we work with their department or their host business at the internship site to develop kind of some peer relationships and somebody that will kind of foster the interns' development while they're there. We also work with the individuals and the business to provide accommodations and adaptations when necessary. Some of the Project Search sites are set up so that there's individualized job development, but we wait to do that until the end of the 3 rotations. But at the end, the goal is competitive employment. So we know obviously the reason for this transformation program, among other things, is the need to move to people to employment, because 25% of people with disabilities are employed, meaning 75% are underemployed. This program specifically kind of addresses some of the challenges that people face when getting employed, and those are some of the soft skills. So it really, we really work hard on helping them develop the soft skills that they'll need to become employed. Every day, our staff and individuals spend an hour prior to their rotation working on team building, interpersonal skills, safety, technology, health and wellness, any kind of soft skills that they might need development on. And then they go to their rotation. So a typical day, would look like this. They do the employability skill class, then they go to their internship site, they have lunch, then they go back to the internship site, and then they have a reflection and a planning time. At our host site with Mohegan Sun, we work with them a year in advance to develop the rotations that are possibly available. Because Mohegan Sun is so large, and they have a bunch of different programs actually that they run through there, the school transition programs and the like. We tried to find rotations that are very meaningful, and try to stay away from, you know, food, filth, and flowers as much as possible. We do as many customer facing opportunities as we can. So the fitness center rep, the wardrobe attendant, the house attendants, coat room, dispatch, those are the things, and even the food court is very customer facing. So it's different from other transition programs in that, you know, we do spend quite a bit of time on with the project search curriculum, whereas in school systems or people coming right out of a school program, they're kind of just, I guess, they're not engaged in the internship as much as they're just exposed to different things. So this is more than just exposure. This is like real world work experience. So again, that is the outcome that is desired here, is a real life work experience. Training in employability as well as independent living skills, doing a career exploration, so looking at 3 different options up for employment. We provide individualized continuous coaching. So we either do it in a 1-to-3 ratio, depending on the funding, or a 1-to-1. Again, those are dependent on funding. We provide adaptations for their success. So our host site, because it's Mohegan Sun and they have uniforms that they all wear, we had a circumstance where an individual has cerebral palsy and he had weakness in his left side and he needed his uniform adapted with a pocket on it so that he could have things readily accessible to him. So the wardrobe department actually worked with him to make that modification on their own. And we stepped in with, you know, doing kind of an assessment to see what he needed and come up with some options. So it was really nice to have that partnership with the host site. And then we do follow along services post-graduation. So in the DDS world, once they graduate from this program, we move to an IDV and do job coaching. Ideally, you know, at Mohegan Sun with the internships, the idea is for them to become employed at Mohegan Sun after. That has happened about, I would say, 30% of the time, but otherwise we're developing, you know, transferable skills that can be used somewhere else. So we'll go closer to their home maybe, or look, you know, kind of in their field of interest to find employment for them. You know, some of the things that we've seen is definitely an increase in their independence, their confidence, and their self-esteem. We had someone who, when they started, before they started the project search program, they were very skeptical. Their family member had never been employed. He went to a special ed school that cost $75,000 a year. And he was at home living with his mother, had applied for jobs, had not gotten any work. His mother had really, she wanted him to work, but didn't really have the confidence that he'd be able to, and thought that Mohegan Sun was just too big and too complicated, and he was never going to be able to make it there. But she was willing to give this internship a try. He did all three rotations. And by the end of the rotation, he decided he really liked this food service position. And he just totally blew them away. And his mother was like thrilled. She couldn't believe that he was able to navigate the employment center basically and get himself to work. Because at Mohegan Sun, the like the HR department and where you do training and is different from where the casino is. It's a mile basically track around the casino. So it is hard to navigate that kind of back area. But he definitely had the increased independence, and transportation getting to work was also a challenge. So we worked with the family on that. And the person did interview for a job there and now works 25 hours a week there. So, really was a great success. One of the things that helps and is kind of a requirement in Project Search with the host site is that they're able to provide natural supports, because once this internship is over, we're done. And if they're still employed there, they need people in the system, in the employment environment to help them should they need accommodations. But our job is to kind of help them build those supports. Again, the rest of the folks that choose not to work at Mohegan Sun after that, we do job development for them and help them take their newly developed skills and transfer those into employment. Basically, we've had 90% success rate in getting people employed, competitively employed within 90 days after Project Search ends. So the national average is 75%. We've been able to do better than that. Our Project Search site can take about, we could take up to 12 people. That's the largest group, but our smallest group had 3. We use assistive technology where we can to help people develop their skills and, do a good job there. Eligibility, this is typically for young people, ages 18 to 34. Every Project Search will kind of have their own guidelines. National Project Search really likes that number to be under 34. So really like 18 to 25. And the reason is that, not a lot of 34-year-olds do unpaid internships, because Project Search is an unpaid internship. Really the idea is moving quickly to competitive employment. So this is really ideal for people who are almost ready for work, but need a little bit more time. So in our Project Search, we take DDS funded individuals, but we also take private pay. And like I said, we work with BRS and school systems as well. So the selection process for Project Search is a little bit different than other internships. We do tours, we have interviews, and we have assessments at the host business. So for example, we'll want to see, whether or not a person can follow multi-step instruction, whether or not they can fold, make a place setting at a dining table, or whatever the rotations require. We use this as a baseline to see where we need to develop skills going forward. And then there's a scoring rubric. But one of the key determinants for success is family involvement and a good support system. People that are willing to work a set schedule, go to work on time every day for the entire internship. They're looking to gain competitive employment. And really, it is a more rigorous focus on employment. Sometimes we see in our IDV individuals that they are really just kind of like, we'll do more exploration than actual work. But the idea here is it is very structured, and the idea at the end is to have a paid job. we also look for, but we train on all of these things, is personal hygiene and grooming skills, independent living skills, appropriate behaviors in the workplace, ability to take direction, and be redirected if necessary, effective communication, utilizing public transportation. We do travel training. If they've had some experience working or volunteering somewhere else, that would be helpful. In this case, all employees and all interns have to pass a background check. And then again, as I mentioned, the desire and the family and team support to really help them get through this 9-month program. There is an application process, which includes their IP or their lawn. This is what our calendar typically looks like. Again, it's 9 weeks. I'm sorry, 9 months with 3 10-week internships. And then there's a graduation at the end, you know, similar to a school year, because again, it does mirror kind of a school setting. And job searches begin in that third round of internships. And again, depending on the individual, we'll do job development either in the community they live in, or we'll do it within the host site. So I know I went through it really quickly. Maybe you have a lot of questions, but I'm happy to take them now if you have any. Yes.
I have
Varian.
a question. Varian Salter, self-advocate coordinator from DDS in the North Region in the Willimantic office. My question is, I noticed it said 18 to 34. Do you take like people older than that, or?
We look at every person and consider what their desires are. Yes. Yep.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Beth?
Beth Fisher, CUNY Employment. Thanks for all of that, Jen. Can you talk a little bit more about the funding? You talked about it's a 1 to 3 or a 1 to 1 depending on the funding. Thank you.
Yes. So for DDS funding, it is a blend of funding, right? So there's GSE funding for the curriculum component of it, and IDV funding for the job rotation portion of it. So really that's your 1 to 3 in the classroom and the 1 to 1 in the rotations. And again, it makes it a little tricky because you only need them for a couple hours a day. So we do have staff that comes in just a couple hours a day to do those job rotations. We could use the GSE funding for that, but the numbers don't work. So it only works. You know, we had to braid a lot of funding to make it possible. But it is finally, you know, worked out now that we're kind of through the pilot. It can be if we're using IDV dollars for transportation as well, there sometimes aren't enough hours for the individual. So we do encourage that they get their own transportation in so that we're not spending time transporting them to and from the site. So there's still a lot to be worked out. I will say that, you know, we continue to have conversations about funding, but the outcomes are excellent. And it is a program worth exploring if somebody does not have a lot of work experience, but is kind of ready for work. You know, there are some folks that just aren't suited for it because they haven't had kind of enough preparation. But I wish I could be a little bit more clear, and I can have somebody else get back to the group with the specifics on the funding, but it is the the GSE funding and this transition funding for the classroom, and then the IDV funding for the rotations.
Keith Avalette, DDS. Robin?
Thank you, Robin Hescock, parent. I have a question. You mentioned that there are some people it's not suited for because they haven't had enough preparation. What
Yep.
Can you just expand upon that? What would you expect them to be coming in with?
They need to be more or less kind of work ready. So if they don't have the stamina to do a 6 or 8 hour day, you know, in a work setting, that would be a consideration. If they are, you know, needing a lot of redirection during the day, that would be a consideration. You know, it's really somebody that, you know, in a couple of months, you know, is going to be ready to kind of work virtually independently.
Okay, thank you.
Sean?
Sean Bannon, DDS, Director of the Operations Center. I just did want to jump in briefly on the funding. I believe, to my understanding, it's typically transitional supports, like 20 hours a week, and then ISE 10 hours a week.
Jennifer, I had a question. Did you find Mohegan Sons as a
We did.
provider? Okay.
Yeah, we are right down the street from them. We had actually just developed a relationship with them maybe a year before that. And they do a school transition program with the local high schools. And so they were already open to it, and thought it was a great program. They love this program, and I'm trying now to convince them to stop doing the school transition programs and just let us take care of the program. And they're considering some of that, but you know, some of the school districts aren't very good with their transition programs at Mohegan Sun. And our program, like I said, it's very structured. And so a person coming into the program has to be able to adhere to that structure. Although it's person-centered, you know, we always want to do that. I think because the goal is competitive employment at the end, you know, we all have constraints in employment, things that we have to do and things that we can't do. So that's what we're trying to teach in this program. I will say a big barrier to the program is that it is not paid. So we get a lot of questions about payment, and you know, we're looking at a stipend for next time, but there's no way to make this competitive employment. It has to be an internship for now.
Keith Avalette, DDS. Trevor?
Thank you. Trevor Rogers, Transition Advisor, DDS. I just wanted to share two quick things. The first is that DDS actually announced on October 11th, we have an NOO out, a Notice of Opportunity, for to establish more project search sites. In the NOO, we have identified that we will expand the number of providers providing this by 1 per region. The NOO is open right now, and what will happen is DDS will cover the cost of project search training and the host business license fee for the first year only, and able to help with the setup. So if you'd like more information about that, it's actually on the DDS website under current news on the left. It's one of those there. But I also did just want to mention that so Project Search is a 9-month internship program that follows the school year. So that being said, individuals cannot start this program again until September of next year. So it's not something that individuals can start until the school year begins next year. And I just wanted to put that out there because I know some of our services, they're not like that, but this is one of those services that follows that time frame. So.
Keith Avalette, DDS. Robin?
Thank you, Robin Hescock, parent. Will any of these programs, these project search programs that you're going to open, accommodate people who would be more suited to group supported employment?
Jennifer from UCP. Ours does not. I could not speak to the project search model fidelity would say no, that it would not be suited to that. And we do aim to follow with model fidelity.
Are there any programs that are designed to provide job skills to people who would end up needing group supported employment? I keep hearing about these wonderful opportunities for people who are eventually ultimately going to end up being able to work independently, but I hear very little for the people who would never really be able to do that, but still could do something in a group setting.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Beth, why don't you jump in here because you do some group supported employment. So
Yeah.
I'll let
Thanks.
you.
Thanks, Keith. Beth Fisher from CUNY Employment Opportunities. I'll respond to that, and then I had a question for Trevor. We run a group supported employment program, and for us, we look at it as on-the-job skills training within our GSE program. So we may have somebody move from a DSO into group supported employment with the goal of, learning some job skills, and from there, then moving on to independent competitive employment. So that's really, how we work it. And we've had, a fair amount of success moving people from GSE to ISE. Some people take longer than others, but that's always our ultimate goal for our GSE participants. So hopefully that answers your question, Robin. Trevor, my question for you is, I'm just wondering if there's a reason why the notice of opportunity is limited to one provider per region. I mean, if you got two great proposals, would you not consider two? And just wondering why the limitation. Thank you.
Sure. So Trevor Rogers, Transition Advisor, DDS. I don't have a firm answer on that, but what I can say is our goal is to expand our service area. So if you got, we actually just recently updated our DDS Employment and Day Services webpage. So if you go to the project search link on there, there's a brand new map that highlights where all of the project search sites are in Connecticut. So I do feel confident in saying that if we only got, I think that our goal is to fund 3. If for some reason we did not get any from one provider agency, I would like to think that that could happen. I cannot say that for a fact because that's not how the NOO is written. But I also want to put out there that the main goal of the group is to expand that service area. So if you look at the map, our goal in accepting those NROs will be expanding that service area. So making sure that some of the places where they're highlighted in yellow, where there's no yellow at all, because there are some large gaps in that, our goal is to get those filled.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Any other questions? All right. Beth, just to let you know, your hand is still raised, but thank you, Jennifer. That was great. Next on the agenda, I sent out, I believe on Friday, a discussion from committee members on items identified by families or individuals that may interfere with moving toward an alternative day site or residential site. Peter Mason had, well, basically all the committees have been discussing this item, and we're trying to put together one document to put all the issues into one document. So the residential committee has put theirs together. The advisory committee has discussed it, and now it's the day committee's turn. And we've been talking about it each meeting. And I went through and I'll just read it out to people, and I just want to make sure that we have everything that we've talked about, and if anything has any other input. But we've talked about for the moving individuals out of the congregate setting into alternative setting, transportation and lack of the public transportation, residential supports for less conventional schedules, lack of understanding of benefits, number of hours for employment compared to day program hours, coordination between residential and day providers is key, medical needs and accessibility if they impact work hours or availability of staff. It would benefit providers if the incentive process is streamlined for providers to receive them, and staffing shortages may cause delays in finding and securing employment. Were there other items that people have that they think we need to put on the list? And those are items that I just took off the minutes as we went along. So I think we touched on everything. So I will submit that to Peter Mason and have him add it to the that document, and hopefully we can work on trying to figure out some of those issues and resolving. Okay, next is Trevor with an update on the Selden Commission. Trevor?
Here, sorry, Trevor Rogers, transition advisor with DDS. So just a brief synopsis of why we're doing this. I presented at our last meeting with the recommendations from this group, which I'll briefly go over just in case some people weren't here. But I presented the recommendations that were delivered earlier this year, and we had a new set of recommendations that was actually delivered in October. And so we wanted to share the most up-to-date recommendations so we can see how some of the ideas and the goals of this group can connect with this ARPA group. So just a quick overview. SELN is the State Employment Leadership Network. They did an analysis of our employment services within the GDS, and they gave us a report that we then in turn took and created different committees to investigate and create recommendations about the different areas of weakness and points that were made within that report from SELN. And so, like I said, we did deliver one round of recommendations earlier this year. I believe it was March or April, and we have our new set of recommendations that have just come through. We actually, the commissioner has reviewed them with his leadership team, and they're still in the process of giving us official written guidance and feedback, but we did have a preliminary meeting where we did discuss. So we do want to quickly share some of those goals so we can see how they will connect with the goals and the work we're doing here. And so the first one is our strategic goals and operating policies subcommittee. And the two recommendations that they made, one of them is specifically related to IP, individual plans, and the different IP meetings that occur to make sure that employment is integrated with written vocational related goals in the IP. The group is investigating this piece a little more, but what they're looking for is more systemic and operational changes to make sure that employment is part of these documents so that it is integrated in the process throughout. The second goal is to precisely identify the roles and responsibilities of the different DDS staff who work with employment, and specifically also integrating how we work with our partners from SDE, the State Department of Education, and ADS. Because as we know, there are a lot of individuals all working for similar goals, including transition advisors, case managers. There are also resource managers that sometimes families and individuals hear that, but they don't necessarily know what that means. We also have our VR counselors and our staff at SDE, and then the different LEAs throughout. So we're looking to just have a clarifying document in simple language that goes over how these different staff members work with families and individuals, how they work and how they work with each other, so that we can clarify their roles and the overlap that's between them. And this will help everyone involved, not just the families and individuals, but also clarifying some of the roles for those staff members. So financing and contracting methods, this is actually the subcommittee that I lead. Our first goal, I discussed a little bit last time because we, right before the goals were officially announced, we did achieve one of them because there were some conversations going on in the background with leadership. And that is that the pathways for GSE and ISE on our one-time employment incentives have been combined at a singular rate. What that means is that previously, if you were in a GSE pathway, on the one-time employment incentive, you did receive a lower payment for the service. It was $34 an hour instead of $55 an hour for the incentive if the individual was already in some sort of ISE placement. And so we were able to make that rate combined, which was a really big success. Another one of the pieces that we talked about was replacing the transition to natural supports benchmark to a 1-year benchmark. We are further investigating this to see if we should, instead of replacing it, add a 1-year benchmark so that we capture both. And the reasoning behind this is because not all individuals will transition to natural supports, and so the providers are not able to access that payment through no fault of their own, because that's just not on the path of the individual. We do want to keep that there. Because it is achievable for some of the individuals that we serve, but we thought that adding a benchmark for 1 year would help further incentivize this, because it would help incentivize that retention and also provide that for our providers. The third piece is creating some sort of interactive tool that models the tool we use within the state to track our one-time employment incentives, just to make the contracting piece in the submission of these documents and review of these documents a little easier. And then finally, changing the deliverables for the benchmarks. And what that means is there's a 3-month benchmark payment that you can get and a 6-month benchmark payment. We are also, like I said previously, suggesting that we add a 1-year benchmark payment. But we want to change the deliverables for this because currently you need to get pay stubs for all of the pay stubs. And what we want to do is change it so that all you need is the pay stub from the first paycheck, the 3rd month paycheck, and the 6th-month paycheck, so that you can see the year to date and do some of those calculations on your own. And that's just to eliminate some of that burden. And then we are also suggesting that we further investigate the prorated amount. And that's why we do this this pay stub. We gather the pay stubs is because the benchmarks are based on a prorated amount of, I believe, 25 hours. And so our group suggests that we decrease that to 15 or 20 hours, because from feedback we've gotten in some investigations we've done, a lot of the individuals who are using the one-time employment incentives, the goal is to increase the hours to 15, 20, 25 in the future, but a lot of them start off at a lower amount of hours, like 10 hours, and they build. So we wanted to make sure that we are having a system that incentivizes employment further and is more realistic for how things work within our system. So the third group, which is training and technical assistance, one of the pieces that they've recommended is a detailed ACRE certified job coaching training. And we have been investigating this further, and we are actually looking into exactly what this means in terms of information about the cost, but also about the length of time and who we would offer this to and how that would all work out. So we are doing some further investigation in that. And then we're also looking into increasing some of, so highlighting some of the different successes that we have for employers, for individuals, making things that are simple language and universal language that describes the value of hiring people with disabilities, and how in all of these employment pieces specifically. And this goal actually does tie right into the next one, which is of services and service innovations. And their first main goal was a major redesign of the employment and day services webpage. Because this is one of the main points of contact for individuals and families when they go onto the DDS website, because they're not looking for that other programmatic stuff like the provider gateway. And so a lot of this has actually already been, a lot of this has already occurred. We've done a major overhaul in the last 2 weeks of the employment and day services webpage just to make sure that everything is the most current and up to date. We're now starting the next phase of adding material, and then we will be working on increasing accessibility and different methods of sharing information, including photographs and videos and all kinds of media. And a great example of how we're expecting this to look is our customized employment page within that. This was recently updated, and there's actually a video that just explains what customized employment is in Connecticut to any audience, even someone who is not within our system, so that they understand. So please go check that out if you'd like. It's starring me and my whole unit. We're slowly trying to create these videos so that we have some more personable but universal language that's describing our services for those who want more information. Including service descriptions that are more concise, that are accurate, but are easy to understand, and give information about what's actually happening in that service, including photos and more training materials. We do have some training materials that have been built over the last, I'll just say over this year. One of those that you see here is the EDS Pathways brochure. So we want to make sure that we include that on our website as well. The information from that brochure has been included on the website under the services section of our webpage, but it's not the whole section of our brochure. It's just the piece of the brochure that overviews what services are offered by employment and day services. And then, as you see here, increasing our accessibility with multiple languages. And like I said, photos that are indicative of the service that's being offered. Another piece, this is something that this warrants more investigation, and we have been, is increasing creating some sort of system, and the idea here is an interactive map that would show where DDS services, EDS, employment and day services, are. What we mean by that is on our current provider list on our website, if you download that, we have an Excel document with it, but there's also all of the data on individual provider profiles. So we collect a lot of information on these providers, and we know the towns that they serve as well as the services that they offer. And so creating some sort of interactive map would be very helpful for individuals and families. If you could scroll over the map, I live in Southington. If you could scroll over Southington and see the service providers in that area and the services they offer. And this is information that we already do have. If you go onto the employment and day, well, not the employment and day page, but on the DDS provider gateway, there's a place where you can look at the different services by town. So you can click Southington and just see what providers are there. So it would be really great if we could create a more accessible way for this to be shown. And there is a lot of support behind this idea. The one piece that is lacking, though, is I do know that I don't believe that our IT team internally has the capacity to build this at this current point in time. So that is a lag in that piece. And then finally, a piece that kind of tracks back to one of the other goals of the strategic goals and operating policies, which is increasing employment goals and meaningful activity within the individual plans. And then one of the last groups, employment performance measurement, quality assurance, and program oversight, they're looking to create clear standards in measuring employment service data and then defining what success looks like within each employment service model to make sure that we have accurate and up-to-date reporting and tracking mechanisms for our employment and day services so that we can make that we can use this data to make more informed decisions as we move forward about where everyone is, and that we can evaluate performance. And We want to look at the annual QSR and how that can capture some information. And they're also looking at how we collect information in different ways and how those different pieces can connect together to build one employment story. And finally, they've been working very closely with our IT team to identify the specific employment data that's missing that we don't currently have access to. Thanks to the Director of Employment and Day Services, we actually do have, I believe it's an MOA with the Department of Labor where they share employment data for the individuals that we serve. That's something that's been active for almost a year now, to the case where we finally have enough. We've been analyzing this data and looking at it. So what we're doing is looking at what's missing from that data to drive that the information that can come out of that. And then the final group is leadership. They're looking to kind of organize and create a clearinghouse of inventory of all of the work that's being done to provide individuals and families information on employment services. So that will also connect to some of our other goals in terms of organizing some of our website, but also our outreach to families and individuals. They want to include all stakeholders and individuals in this to make sure that we're not missing any communication gaps. And they want to strengthen all of the efforts that we have by creating an employment support network, I believe is what they've been calling it, for individuals and families and all of the different stakeholders within. Yep, sorry. I was like, I didn't see that on the page, but that's because it's here on number 6, to make an employment support network. And specifically, they want to help close some of the gaps, because there are all kinds of employment resources and there are all different kinds of programs going on in different areas of the state to connect employment. And so they're looking to develop an idea of all of those different pieces and see how they can facilitate and connecting some of those gaps. Also within DDS as well, the different programs and ideas that we have going on. And I do think that is it. This is just a picture of the the memo that went out that enacted some goals that were set already. As you can see here, on the bottom of the page where there's like bullets, the top bullet is a goal that was set in place by, I just went over, the Financing and Contracting Method Subcommittee. And then the bottom 2 goals were goals of the Strategic Goals and Operating Policy, goals and recommendations that they made in the first quarter that were adopted. So I see, Trevor, will you send your presentation? Yes, I can send this presentation out to the group. I'll send it to Keith so that he can send it out after. And are there any questions on any of this information? I know that it's a lot of information and some of it can be very technical. Beth? Oh, you're muted.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Trevor. Beth Fisher from CUNY. For some reason, whenever you put up your presentation, my screen goes black, so I appreciate you sending it out. I have a question about when you look to put together that employment network for self-directed, it's kind of like a private pay network is how I understand it. Has there been any discussion about the current staffing crisis and, I guess as a provider, one of my fears would be that we'll lose our good staff, to go to, this private network. And that's really got the potential to erode the system and take away other services that are, really doing good work. So has there been any discussion about that?
Sorry, just trying to pull up the piece that I had on this. So I don't believe there's been discussion on that, but let me go back to those slides to make sure that I'm clearly articulating what they said. And I know you can't see, so I do apologize. But I don't want to inaccurately describe what this group is doing because in all honesty, this is one of the subcommittees that I try to go to all of them just to view and be up on what's going on, but this is the one I've been to the least. But I want to make sure. So because I don't, the network is constructed, but also because I don't think that we're, I don't necessarily know that I understand your question because I don't think that they're trying to create, you're saying that people are going to leave the provider for this network, because I don't think that we're trying to create like a network to provide services. I think they're trying to create like a networks to bring these different roles together to communicate on the different, on how they're making employment successful within their role.
So again, Beth Fisher from CUNY. Maybe I misunderstand the concept then. I guess my original impression was that, you know, anybody who was self-directed would have a network of providers where they could go and purchase those supports, and that's going to require qualified staff to deliver that service. So where are those staff coming from? Or am I completely misunderstanding the concept?
So I think you might be misunderstanding a little, because now I think now I understand what you're saying. So I don't think that this is necessarily pulled into the self-direction piece. I think that they're saying that they want to have an employment support network in terms of creating a network for all of those within our system to help with this employment, in furthering employment. That's an ongoing piece. A group that can work to help alleviate some of the misinformation and communication barriers within the system. But I don't think that because I do understand what you're saying, I don't think that it was connected to the self-direction piece, because I do know that currently, as Beth is saying, their individuals have the option to self-direct their services, which means they can hire the staff that they choose.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that confusing piece. I was trying to,
It's okay.
like I said, this was the group I didn't know too much about, so I was trying to breeze through that one, and I might have added a little bit of confusion when I did that. But I'm gonna send this to Keith so that everybody can view these slides afterwards. I apologize that you can't see them. I think part of it might be because I have a monitor that I present everything up on. So, are there any other questions that I can answer?
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Thank you, Trevor. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Beth, just a question for you. Is every presentation that is presented, does your screen go black?
It's only when Trevor does it. It happened last meeting and this meeting. I could see Jen's just fine, so I don't know what that's about.
Oh, okay.
I wonder if, oh, sorry, Trevor Rogers at DDS. So Jen shared her screen. I shared the presentation so that you guys couldn't see my screen. I don't know if that's what makes the difference, because on Teams you have the option to do that. So maybe next time I have to present in this group, I'll try the other way. Because I did like, I'm looking now, it says like PowerPoint Live. I do that so that I can still like access my email up there while I'm doing it. But I think that might be why. And because I've heard others have similar issues. So next time I'm going to try doing it the opposite way, and we'll see if it fixes it.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. Our next agenda item is the discussion on the draft of Moving On Transformation Initiative. So let me share my screen for a second. Could everybody see that? Am I frozen again?
I can see it.
You're good.
Okay. All right, this is was sent out to everybody, and this is just a draft copy of the Moving On Transformation Initiative. And had sent it out on Friday. I hope people got a chance to look through it. And basically, it just goes through the transformational initiative, both residential, day, working with Deloitte, and the change in a bit that we want to do 2 phases. Phase 1 will be a voluntary for private providers, and that those providers that want to volunteer and are ready, willing, and able to begin the transformation process can begin. And then phase 2 will occur after meeting with Deloitte and getting their recommendations on the transformational change system and agreeing on the transformational plan and moving forward from there. We are currently working with Deloitte on a template for providers to fill out for stage 1. And we're hoping that's going to be completed within the next couple of weeks and get it out to the provider network. And it just talks about the different things that will be required in the plan. And then the regions will work with the ARPA team at approving the plans and moving forward with them. So each provider will submit the plans to their primary region, and then they will move from there. And then it talks about the different residential supports eligible and the day section that are eligible for the incentives. And then it goes into the different parts that we've discussed over time. But today I just wanted to have people if they have any questions regarding this moving on incentives, kind of now is the time to talk about it and to get it into the plan as we move forward with it. And why don't we start, Jennifer? I see your hand is raised.
Thank you, Jennifer Keatley, UCP Eastern Connecticut. So my question is in regard to the transition plans. I guess I'm confused about what the need for the agency to provide that plan would be. So currently, and maybe I'm removed from the process and don't quite understand, but if someone moves from a DSO to a GSE, we don't have to submit a plan for that. We have a team meeting and then they move. We don't have to submit a plan. I just find reading this, I wonder what's the purpose of this, of the agency having to provide the plan. It just seems like a lot more work.
Good question. I think because of the process of the incentives and moving, developing a plan that you may end up closing certain programs, you may end up, you know, this is both residential and day. So they're looking at, you know, if they're closing a group home, the process of that happening. If you're closing maybe a DSO program or something, I think the whole intention is how are you transforming your agency and moving forward? So they're developing a list of questions to answer and on the whole transformational process. And I think it'll become clearer once the plans are developed and you see that what it looks like.
Okay, I guess I'm still concerned about that process. I understand you know, that the goal is to move a couple, 200 people. We're not talking about, I don't think for any of us, we're talking about closing a day program, because there are people that are going to need day programs. So unless we're eliminating one service to provide another, I don't see the need to provide a plan. Our plan is individual services to individuals who are interested in moving from one setting to another. And for that, that just requires a team meeting. And I'd like to keep that process as simple as possible and not have to, in order to get this incentive, we have to do a whole plan. It just seems cumbersome and, you know, like really overreaching.
All right, I will bring that up to the group, and we'll continue to discuss that. Beth?
Beth Fisher from CUNY. Thanks, Keith. I share Jennifer's concerns. I guess I would ask another question related to that is, you know, so if we do have to submit a plan, I mean, what's the criteria for approval? Again, I kind of see that happening at a team level. So, you know, it's a little confusing to me also that we would have to go through this process. I had two other quick questions I wanted to ask too, is when, at what point might we see a timeline? Because I recognize that this is going to be, you know, pretty condensed timeline in the grand scheme of things if we're, you know, looking to have it, you know, this process wrapped up by July 1st of 2024. So, you know, at what point, I know you said a couple of weeks, you know, we might get, you know, the template of the plan. How long will we have to do it? How long, you know, until we're implementing it? And can we implement it as we're just going across the course of our business? I mean, we're constantly moving people from GSE to ISE, but I'm not submitting a plan for that. And so at what point can we start to claim those incentives if we're not in the voluntary pilot phase 1 piece would be one question. And then the last question, I guess, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate for this group because I know we're not talking about rates per se, but I feel like there's been some confusion around, will these incentives be cost settled or not? Because if they're an incentive that providers can keep to build up their infrastructure to support a transformation, I don't know how we can then be expected to cost settle it. And it is money coming through the contract, right? So by default, maybe it is subject to any cost settlement. So not necessarily thinking, Keith, you can answer that question right now, but if that could be taken back, that would be most helpful.
I can give you what, to my understanding, is that the incentives are not cost settled, but each provider needs to follow the cost standards that are out there that are, you know, for just for an example, if you had someone that made sub minimum wage, you cannot pay that individual minimum wage because that's not allowed under the cost standards.
Yeah, and I do understand that piece. I guess, though, when you look at the end of the year and, you know, we're doing our financial reporting, if all those incentives are lumped into the bottom line, it's going to end up in a cost settlement. It's not going to be money that we can keep without having to follow the new revenue retention rules, for example. So it kind of takes some of the incentive away from a provider if we're going to have to jump through those hoops as well.
And again, you're right. I think that's a question either Peter or Lisa needs to answer. And I don't want to say the wrong thing but yeah, my understanding is they had to follow the cost standards.
Yeah. And I've asked this
Oh, okay.
question of others and I've gotten different answers. So if that could maybe go back to the advisory committee for clarification.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? And again, I want to make it clear that this is a draft. It's already, it could be on the second version already. I know the residential committee has met on it. The advisory committee has met on it. And it's been brought to Deloitte. So Jennifer, you have another question?
I do. Again, just looking at the timing and the different phases, I'm wondering what is the anticipated time period for phase 2, which is basically the mandatory phase? Is that after 2024 or are they in quick succession?
They are in quick succession. I believe they will, phase 1 will start, actually, we could say now and until March of 23. And then after March, we will move into phase 2.
I mean, so that, there's a very short period of time then to claim incentives, I guess, correct? In phase 2,
Under phase 1, the incentives should be available will be available in phase 2 too.
Okay, but phase 2 then, as I'm reading, will include a requirement that all providers with a congregate day or CLA develop a transition plan for their agency. So I guess my concern around there is, I guess if in general the plan is to remain open and identify individuals, that's a simple enough plan. But if it is, more complex than that, and we're going to be required to move a certain number of people, that would be a lot, and more than I think is necessary.
And that question has been brought, Keith level at DDS, has been brought up in the other committees. And it's, as I said, this is draft and it's changing, and that is being talked about more moving forward about the requirement for all providers and making it mandatory, that type of thing. So it hasn't changed yet, but it may be changing as we move forward.
And again, like, not to harp on the rates, this is Jennifer, UCP, not to harp on the rates, but, to make something mandatory for all providers with only temporary rates and not permanent rates, I just don't know how we can operate in that kind of setting, in that kind of environment. So I just have to say that on the record that, a permanent plan can't be made with temporary funding.
And we've heard that too. So we understand it and working on it. I think Beth was in a meeting yesterday with me on the rates in general, and it's something that's being worked on, and I don't have the answer for you as yet. So, Robin.
Thanks, Robin Hescock, parent. I have all kinds of warning flags going up in my brain listening to all these presentations, which are wonderful for people who are more capable. But every document I read and every policy I read seems to dismiss the fact that there are people who cannot live independently, cannot work independently, will always need to be in a group setting, both living arrangement and also work arrangement. And I don't see any provisions in any of these documents that there's acknowledgement of that fact. All I see is like, we're going to incentivize to move people out of group homes and put them in their own houses and use all kinds of assistive technology, or put them in out in the community somewhere, and there's a large group of people who that just is not a possibility for. And I'm just worried that the private providers are going to be incentivized to try to push people out, because they're getting all these incentives to do that. And the people who need those group settings are going to be just lost. I would like to see a paragraph in here that states that there's an understanding that there is a subset of people that this would not be possible for.
And certainly I can talk about getting it put into this document, but there's been other discussions. I think in the very beginning, in the introductory meeting, Peter Mason was talking about that we're not looking to close group homes. We're not looking to close DSOs or GSEs. We're just looking to move individuals that are able out into different alternative settings that could meet their needs in a different, more positive way. Individuals that are not able to do that, we're not looking to change that at all.
Yeah, no, I understand that that's the intent, but you're incentivizing only moving people out. And all of these work programs are for people who can work independently, and there's money to incentivize the day programs to move people out to independent working, and there's just no discussion or no provisions or acknowledgement in any of these documents that you understand that that's not always going to be possible, and there's no incentives to keep people in the group homes. So that may not be your intent, but if you incentivize with money, that's what's going to happen. And it seems to be the plan anyway. I'm sure DDS would love if everybody moved out of a group home, but it's just not possible. And I just don't see a lot of documented support for that.
And Keith, I will let Dee go ahead. Do you have?
I'm sorry, just in any of these plans that or any of these discussions we're having.
Keith, I will let DDS, and I understand your concern, but again, through this whole process, we're looking at moving 100 individuals out of residential congregate settings and 200 people out of day congregate settings. And I believe in the day there's over 6,000 people. So we're just looking at a small fraction of the population in this transitional process to move into more independent settings if they're able. Again, I don't think there's the pressure to move everybody out at all. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. It's just that this is a pilot program, and usually a pilot program is designed to lead to a full-blown program afterwards. So I would assume that this is the direction that DDS wants to go, even though you only have the money for 100 right now. Am I wrong?
We have the 100 on the residential side, but the part of the goal too is that individuals that are not able or need congregate settings, if an individual moves out of a congregate residential settings, that would potentially can open a bed for that person. So if you move an individual that is able to out, other individuals can move in, and they are talking if there are group homes, particularly in areas that are difficult to staff or not a lot of more remote areas of the state, that they've talked about closing. That has been discussed, but I think for the most part, it's just moving individuals who want to move and be independent or more independent out into the community. Beth?
Beth Fisher from CUNY. I certainly understand DDS's intent, and I also understand, Robin's concern. I would support language that just simply acknowledges that this is not a program for everyone. But as we've talked, and I think more and more about it, I mean, there will be people who need that GSC level of support, and what seems to be missing from any of these discussions is what is the future of GSE? I mean, there are a lot of threats to that program model out there right now. And, there's really not been any meaningful discussion around it, so for our agency, the big thing would be is if the special certificate from the federal DOL to pay sub-minimum wages went away, it would be cost prohibitive for us to run a GSE program. I mean, we've talked about moving everybody to minimum wage. We've run the numbers, and it's not it's cost prohibitive, but it also would put a provider in a position where if you want to go out and bid on work for a GSE crew, you're not competitive because you've got to pay minimum wages to, say, 4 to 6 people to fill a job that an employer could hire 1 or 2 people at that same wage. And so I think that, that's kind of been some writing on the wall for a long, long time. And I maybe it doesn't fit into this forum, but I think if you really step back and you look at system transformation, it's probably a question that DDS and along with some providers might need to take a hard look at.
Keith Lavalette, DDS. I think you're absolutely right, Beth. And I don't know, Trevor, if you can talk, is there anything on the employment side that is discussing the sub-minimum wage currently? I'm not quite sure.
Sure. So just to start, so all of the sub-minimum wage, all of that is federally regulated. So none of that is within our control, and we actually provider agencies apply to the Department of Labor, the United States Department of Labor, to get a 14C certificate, which allows them to pay sub-minimum wages to individuals with IDD. There's been lots of discussion on this, and I think the only way that I can answer this question is within the framework of my division, which is that we are an employment first agency. And what that means is that employment is one of the first and preferred options that we have for individuals, but it does not mean that individuals need to be employed. Employment First is a nationwide movement that started to shift employment to a focus, because if all of those here who are aware of the historical services that were provided to individuals, employment was not always on the table depending on where you were. And so Employment First came about to make sure that employment was a topic of discussion no matter what. It doesn't mean that an individual needs to be employed, but if they want to be employed, we want to help them. We're actually, it's not, I was looking while we were talking about this. We just recently updated the Employment First webpage on our site. It hasn't been posted yet. So please don't go look, because what's there now is just the policy. But one of the pieces that we are sharing on there, and I'm going to try to share this, I don't know if it's going to work. It's an image, is this image that's just kind of like a brief overview of the facts about Employment First in Connecticut within the framework of DDS Employment and Day Services, because we do have this initiative that makes us an Employment First agency, but that does not force any individual to pursue employment or to change their current service. It's just meaning that employment is always a topic of discussion at planning meetings to make sure that it's not something that's unavailable to individuals who want it. But first and foremost, the state and the department, we focus on self-determination and person-centered planning. So the individual gets to choose where they want to be and what they want to do, and they determine the services that they receive. And so that's an important piece of all of our individual planning meetings. But I do want to address that. I know a lot of families and individuals get worried with a lot of this because they don't want the one of the individuals that's in these services to be forgotten. And that's not the case here. When we work on some of these new services, it's because we have all of these day services that serve a large portion of our individuals. I don't want to say incorrectly, but I would assume the majority of our individuals are within all of our different day programs. And there are programs to increase our employment services because they're not as accessible to individuals everywhere around the state. That doesn't mean that we want to decrease and we want to de-incentivize individuals from a group supported employment or a day service option if that's what's best suited for them and their needs. But we want to make sure that the other employment services are available because the capacity for them, like Project Search, increasing that so that we actually have it available for the individuals who want it. Because right now there are group programs and day programs very widely across the state. And I know that we get worried when we talk about these employment programs, but these focuses are to increase employment options, but not in any way to decrease our day supports or to force any individuals to move over. And I know that was like a very long and convoluted answer, but I do just want to dispel the fears that we are working to get rid of some of those things because that's not something that we're trying to do. I know that there are a lot of fears that federally things could change. And I don't have an answer on how that would affect us, but I do have to say that we have to abide by all federal regulations that come upon us. Just like the provider agencies do. So if something like that happens, it's something that we would all have to look into, but it's not anything that I've heard. I just think that people have been more worried about it because there's been more of a focus on sub minimum wages as we focused on employment. And so I don't know if that opened up any questions or closed some of the questions, helped answer some, but I see Beth, you still have your hand up.
So thank you, Beth Fisher from CUNY. Well, I would first assert that GSE is employment. I would not lump it with a day program. It's community-based integrated employment with a higher level of support. And I think for some individuals, that may be the best employment that they are able to achieve. And you've heard me say, we're pretty aggressive about helping people move from GSE to ISC, but there is that pocket of individuals who might not pass GSE. And yes, we applied to the Federal Department of Labor for our certificate. And if that were to go away, then, we would probably close our GSE program. And I don't think we'd be the only provider in the state to do that. Then we're talking about thousands and thousands of DDS, program participants who then, what are we going to do? Are they going to go back to the day programs? I mean, that's exact opposite of employment first. And it's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen, next month. But I think that there ought to be some planning and thought because my personal belief is that it is an eventuality. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen. There is a grassroots movement across the country in that direction. And I get that's out of all of our hands. I'm just suggesting that there might be some proactive thinking about what happens if that were to occur. So that's just my 2 cents on the topic. And I know I've talked about this a million times, so I will leave it there. Thanks.
Trevor
Keith,
Rogers, DDS. Oh, sorry, Keith. I just wanted to, first off, I want to apologize. I didn't mean to say that group supported employment wasn't employment, but I meant to say that it's not one of our competitive integrated employment service models, but it is employment. And regardless, our goal as an employment and day services division is not employment, but it's to provide meaningful community participation for the individuals we serve, day and employment. And I do have to agree with you, Beth, that I do think that planning for something like that is something that's smart to do because oftentimes we are reactive and not proactive. And I think that it's better to be proactive on that because again, I do not have, I've heard nothing in terms of that happening. But what I can say is that looking at the data, the majority of 14C certificates in the state were not renewed over the last 5 years. So about 5 years ago, we had probably 80 certificates with, and now we have about 25. And so that is a reality. And I do agree with you that it's something that should be addressed because even though I'm saying all this about employment, I want to be clear. Those day services are very important to some of our individuals, to a lot of our individuals, because that's the service that's best for them and that allows them community participation. So by no means in saying that, am I trying to advocate against that.
Keith Levelette, DDS. If I can go to Robin and Beth, if we can go to you, it's 4:03 right now, and I believe the video automatically shuts off at 4:05.
I was
So-
just hoping to respond, but okay.
I just wanted to second what Beth said. That's the point I've been trying to make, I think, in every meeting we've had, and she said it much more eloquently. And Trevor, you just confirmed exactly my fear. And I believe I said initially that the day that the group support employment has disappeared, and you just confirmed that it has by saying that they're down to like 20. I can't find one. My daughter isn't in one anymore. She's just stuck in a day program now because they've all closed for that reason. And so I just would like to see some of these incentive programs be pointed at some of these group. I know that it's not your model, but it is going to be the model for millions of, or thousands of people, whether you like it or not. And I'd like to see some incentive money and some thinking about how we're going to preserve those.
Beth, we got a minute.
So I would just say that we clearly here at CUNY understand that other agencies are closing their GSE programs because we have a waiting list for that service. We get a referral call almost every day because parents and teams cannot find that service. So it is a need.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Just as a reminder, our next meeting is switched to a Monday, 11/7, and then the time has changed to 4 p.m. So with that, could I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Beth Fisher from CUNY.
Second?
Jennifer Keatley, UCP.
All right. Thank you, everybody. It's a good meeting today.